Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm your host, Corey Graham. Join us here every Friday night at 8 p.m. or listen anytime via podcast at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, to name just a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where the independent new authors come first. Author A.J. Minch has written a book that invites readers on a journey of transformation. The book is titled An Airline Pilot's Final Flight to Sobriety. And we're going to talk all about this. The author, Andy, is sitting right here with me now. Andy, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
It's great to have you here, and I'm curious about an airline pilot's final flight to sobriety. Andy, can you tell me all about this?
I can. So it's an 80-page narrative memoir where the reader will join me on a metaphorical flight spanning 4 decades of aviation, starting in the United States Navy on board the carrier USS Enterprise chasing Soviet submarines. Then I went to U.S. Customs Service out of Homestead Air Force Base in Miami, chasing drug runners. And then I was chasing good layovers for the next 30-year layovers with a major airline. It's a fast read. Many of my readers have read it in an hour at one sit down. The 6 chapters are takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, approach, and landing. Landing corresponds to my 2-year sobriety date. And I just pretty much explore why we drink. I unpack 2 belief systems that I had, which were you can't have fun unless you drink, or drinking leads to having fun. And then more importantly, how we use alcohol and other substances, for that matter, to medicate our pain, suffering, PTSD, trauma. So I believe both those things. I start out with the chapter Takeoff, kind of my boyhood, my dream to be an airline pilot, my entrance into flight school in Pensacola, Navy flight school. But before that, I experienced a little bit of trauma in the Navy up at NAS Brunswick in 1979, awaiting my seat at Pensacola. There was a P-3 crash, big Navy plane crash, with all souls on board dying. I was asked to go to the crash site, even though I hadn't started flight school.
Wow.
But that was a brutal, horrible, nightmarish experience, to the extent that when I got to Pensacola, I told them I didn't want to fly. And they're like, hey, you're flying. Anyway, so I just kind of sucked it up, became a pilot, chased Soviet submarines off the carrier in the Indian Ocean in the early 80s, had a near midair collision. It didn't affect me that much at that time, but later in my flying career, I basically developed a fear of midair collision. But, you know, you just drink, you have a few beers, you debrief, you're just like, this was before the days of, they didn't out-process from the Navy and check everyone for PTSD, which they do now. Anyway, so I just, got into drinking. I want to make it very clear, I never got a DUI. I never flew intoxicated. So I had it down to a wire on, how much I was highly, highly functional. No kicking the dog, no DUIs, show up for my flight, press the uniform, whether it was in the Navy or U.S. Customs or the airlines, Paris, Rome, London. We basically unwind after a mission. We, do our workouts, and then we meet not all of us, but a lot of us meet at the happy hour, particularly in Amsterdam, which is my main layover. Most of the crews have a couple of beers and go out to dinner. I would say longer, but I monitor very closely, my BAC by bringing a breathalyzer with me. So I could kind of stay on top of that. So I don't pretend to be a psychiatrist, but I was involved in a recovery program, and I started to unpack things that accrued in my life, like divorce, being a long-distance dad for my 2 young daughters. It's all in the book. I unpack it. There's a lot of humor. There's a lot of levity, a lot of my first time putting up Christmas tree lights without a glass of red wine in 29 years. I was able to do it hours doing these chores with my wife while I was drinking, but what a chore it was, what a new experience it was to do sober, and how I just used alcohol as a crutch to do difficult tasks. So I have a heart to, share my story. Not that I'm anyone special, but, I found freedom.
I love it. I love the message of this book. Thank you, Andy, for putting this out there. Again, the title of this is An Airline Pilot's Final Flight to Sobriety. This is written by A.J. Minch, published by Covenant Books. So really you can get it everywhere, like at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Andy, it's been really great talking with you tonight. Thanks again.
You're very welcome. It's been my honor and privilege. Thank you very much.
The audiobook edition of the new book by Drew Glick. It's titled The Wheelhouse, the true story about a boy and his dogs. Well, this is out now, and that's what we're going to be talking about. The author, Drew, is right here with me. Drew, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Drew, can you tell me all about what readers and audiobook listeners are going to find whenever they get into The Wheelhouse?
Well, the wheelhouse is a very generalized term, but in particular to this book in the series, it starts with me and my two dogs, Sasha and Gabby. It's not an easy read specifically for dog lovers, but it's a great platform for people to kind of help them through their own trials and tribulations, because a lot of the material is relatable. And as has been said to me, it's a very honest book, and I'm very open with my life and the circumstances I've had to go through. But it really is about my two dogs and how they essentially saved me from a fate worse than death.
Drew, how did you decide to write this? What gave you the idea?
You know what? It was kind of accidental in a way. I was kind of looking for an outlet, like a therapeutic outlet. And one day I just started putting my thoughts down on paper. And the next thing I know is I had a 300-page novel.
You said this is part of a series. Can you tell me about that?
The series right now is planned for 5 books. The next 2 in the series comes out. The next one, which is called The Wheelhouse, The Last Day. That'll be out around Christmas this year. And the follow-up to that, The Wheelhouse, Death of a White Knight, is scheduled for late spring 2025.
And before the show, we were chatting a little bit, and I understand there's some big things going on with this.
There's a lot of big things going on with this. Yeah, so the series as a whole was just adapted into a 5-part limited series. And the first episode was filmed about 2 weeks ago. They're in post now. And it does star me as myself. Whether I will stay myself, I don't know. I don't know how good of an actor I'll be. Reliving these moments for me on screen is a lot easier said than done. We have a great director, great crew. It's directed by a young lady named Nina Yasik. She did a fantastic job of putting the vision together. My partner in the film, really lovely young lady, Tiffany Villalobos, really brings to life a lot of the relationship drama between Drew and his fiance at the time. I'm not going to ruin the book because a lot of it, again, is adapted from the books. From what I've seen so far, it's going to be a good hit. I think it's going to do something.
Drew, what does your writing background look like? How much have you done before this?
Let's say I made the attempt at writing previously. Wasn't always the best result, but as I always say, everybody's got to start somewhere. I never was professionally trained in creative writing, and never went to college for this kind of thing. As people always told me, write about what you know, and I seemed to kind of flourish with that. And when I started writing about things that was familiar to me, specifically like my life, it just seemed to write itself, really. It's been a long road, and, I think the updated and revised edition will be out in about 2 weeks. We got a brand new cover for that one, a lot of new stuff added to the books, and just some really great things happening on all fronts.
Yeah, you mentioned the covers. These are great covers, Drew. How did that all come together?
I'm a perfectionist, to put it to you like that, to put it simply. And I went through a lot of different illustrators. I don't know if you can still find the original cover. That cover was great. That was done by a close friend of mine. Name is Eric Hunn, and he used to draw Wolverine and Hulk for Marvel.
Oh, wow.
The art style was very reminiscent of a manga book. And so, I said, you know what? When the book starts to sell, we'll update the cover. And by happenstance, and maybe it was, luck, I found a company that's overseas that specialized in this kind of thing. And they were able to really capture the vision of what I was trying to kind of get across in those covers.
And we're talking about the audiobook edition. So you wrote this book, you're looking at these words on the page, and now all of a sudden the audiobook comes and somebody is reading your own book back to you. Drew, what's that like?
Surreal. That's all I can tell you. That's the best way to put it. Other than surreal, it feels almost like I'm dreaming. To hear it back in someone else's voice, and I don't say pretending, but for lack of a better word, pretending to be me, was an experience. I won't lie. But I will say that I am going to be re-recording that book, narrating it myself, and we're in the works on that now. Just a lot of people say, hey, you should do it. You got a great voice, Drew. I'm like, well, we'll see what happens. So I guess, they like it, and I'm going to continue to do it.
Again, the title is The Wheelhouse, the true story about a boy and his dogs. It's written by Drew Glick, published by the Audiobook Network, so go wherever you usually go to get your audiobooks, and you'll be able to pick it up, like Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. Drew, thanks again for coming on the show and telling me all about this. It's really exciting. Thanks again.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Joining me right now here at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, I'm happy to welcome author DeAnn Durrett. DeAnn, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for allowing me to join with you.
I just wanted to congratulate you, DeAnn. You have a new book out titled A Life of a Christian. Can you tell me all about this? What are readers going to find here?
Well, it's about my struggles in life and how I overcome my struggles with the Lord's hand in my life, how He helped me get through everything.
DeAnn, what sorts of readers did you have in mind?
They would be people who are struggling and need to understand why it's important to draw closer to the Lord. They would see it's from a child of God and see the true testimonies.
So how did the idea to write this come about? What made you sit down and say, hey, I got to start writing this book?
Well, usually I felt in my heart I want to write a book, and I didn't know exactly what kind until after I became a Christian, and then that's when I started thinking, well, this would be something good to write about, things I went through, all the struggles and hardships.
DeAnn, have you ever done anything like this before, writing and publishing or anything?
No, so this is my first.
So being your first, was this a really long project for you?
No, not really. I think maybe about 2 weeks once I got started.
So you have the writing of the manuscript, hand it off to your publisher, Christian Faith Publishing, then you have that publishing process. DeAnn, what did you find the most challenging part of that?
I was just making sure that I was able to do it, just going through the steps and just trying to make sure I get it all done to make it happen.
Well, you have a lot of time, you have a lot of work into this. So that day finally comes, you get the first copy, and there it is, the finished product. It's a real thing. You're holding it in your hands. DeAnn, what kind of a moment is that like for you?
It was excitement and just a big relief knowing that I was able to accomplish something in life.
And now that you're a published author, when you think about that, what's the most rewarding aspect of it for you?
I would think it's the excitement, just knowing that I finally completed one of my goals in life.
So looking down the road, do you think you might write a follow-up to this or maybe some other sort of book?
Maybe some time down the line I might. I thought about writing one, but I'm not sure exactly what it would be yet.
Now, when you sat down to do some writing on this, was writer's block ever a thing you had to deal with?
I was just trying to make sure that I was putting everything down, everything that I went through, all the struggles and the time frame of certain things that went through.
We have a lot of people listening who are just aspiring authors. They're just starting out in all of this. And DeAnn, I'm sure you learned an awful lot along the way of doing this. Is there anything in the way of advice that you could throw out there for them?
Just do what's on your heart and never settle. Just if it's something that you feel strongly to do, I would say just go for it.
Great advice. So this is a big project, a big undertaking, and it's hard to do it all by yourself. It's helpful if you have some people around you that can maybe keep you encouraged and motivated along the way. DeAnn, did you have people like that in your life?
I had some friends that I could talk to, and if I had any hardships or needed to talk with somebody, I had some friends that I could go to.
And did you find yourself writing maybe a certain time every day? Like some of us like to write early in the morning, and some of us like to stay up really late and write, and others of us, we just write whenever we can find the time or whenever we feel that inspiration. So what kind of a writer were you?
I love to type and do all that stuff, so I kept writing, and there were times I would stop, but then later on during that time or the next day, I would write some more. Whatever came to mind, I would go back to writing more.
And if there was one big idea, one major thing, DeAnn, that you would want every reader to take from this book when they read it, what would you say that is?
Just knowing or seeing that somebody else went through some hard times and other people are not alone. Just knowing that you're not alone in the struggles or hardships, it might be able to helpful for them.
What sounds like a lot of readers are going to find this book a blessing. Again, it's titled A Life of a Christian. It's written by DeAnn Durrett and published by Christian Faith Publishing. You can find it everywhere, places like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, and also down the street at your local bookshop. DeAnn, thanks again for coming on the show and telling me all about this. It was great talking with you.
Well, thank you for this. I'm very grateful for it.
I'm looking at a book right now. It's a heartwarming and inspirational spiritual guide written by Louis Petrossi. It's titled Passport to Heaven. And we're going to be talking all about this. Louis is right here with me now at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. Louis, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, sir.
Can you tell me all about Passport to Heaven, Louis? What are readers going to find here?
First of all, it's the first book of a trilogy of family Christian faith stories. It's actually a heart-rending love story that sprouted from a conversation between a precocious 11-year-old girl and her grandfather. She says to her grandfather, "Grandpa, we need a passport to travel to another country. Do we need a passport to get to heaven?" And that's where the title came from. So the grandfather says, "Yes, you do need it." And it's a beautiful story, full of emotion, psychological things, spiritual, full of joy, hope, love, and peace. And it's a very moving story that makes us understand and cherish our connections with loved ones. The insights in it resonate across generations.
Louis, what types of readers did you have in mind for Passport to Heaven?
Actually, when I wrote it, I didn't look at it that way. I wrote it the effect, and I think it really touches all people of all ages and all beliefs to experience the essence of a life well lived by embracing 4 special truths that will last till the end of time, namely gratitude, loyalty, forgiveness, and sharing. The dialogues are filled with sincerity and valuable lessons that touch the heart. So it's a moving book. It's a relatively quick read, and it's something that regardless what you're doing in life, it's something that you can take pride in and enjoy and get something out of it. And there are not too many books, by the way, that are written where a grandfather is talking to a granddaughter.
So, Louis, how did this book come about? What sparked you to start writing it?
Well, originally, I guess that goes all the way back to college days when I took a course in creating writing. I didn't write again until the business world, and I published an investment newsletter, and I wrote some fiction books like How Ordinary People Become Millionaires and The Richest Man in China. And I just had an inspiration, and my grandchildren were another motivating force. And I said, I'd like to write a trilogy of family stories that all people could profit from and enjoy reading. And so far, the reviews have been pretty good, Corey.
Wonderful. So once you got started on Passport to Heaven, Louis, was this a long journey for you, the writing and publishing process?
It took about a year and a half to put it together. I did a lot of thinking, and I'm saying, okay, Grandpa says there is a passport to heaven. Well, what's in a passport to heaven? And I narrowed it down to, of course, there are many things, as you know, Corey, that you could add into it, but I figured that it would have to be, gratitude would have to be one of them. Loyalty would have to be another one. And forgiveness would definitely have to be one. And sharing, sharing ideas and helping people is the essence of our lives.
So when you finally get your first copy in, you're holding it, you're looking at it, it's a real thing, Louis. What's going through your mind at that point?
Well, many things were going through my mind. I saw this as an excellent legacy to leave my 11 grandchildren. And I thought it'd be a book out there that would give meaning and purpose to a lot of people's lives, as well as enjoying the story. And I don't know how it happened, but I transitioned from writing business books into writing a spiritual trilogy. And in fact, I just finished the second book in the trilogy.
So a lot of people listening to us right now, Louis, are authors who are just starting out. So do you have anything maybe in the way of advice that you could throw out there for them?
The first thing I'd say to someone that was starting out is follow your passion. And procrastination is not the mother of invention. Action is the mother of invention. And let's say I'm going to write for an hour and I look at it, I just put it down. And then don't criticize it.
Well, this is going to be a blessing, I think, for so many readers. Again, the book is titled Passport to Heaven. It's written by Louis Petrossi, published by Christian Faith Publishing, and you can get it everywhere, really, places like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, and also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Louis, thank you again for joining me and telling me all about this. It was great chatting with you tonight.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
The book I'm looking at right now, and the one we're going to be talking about, is a nostalgic memoir of childhood adventures and life lessons. It's written by Walter Donald Foster, and it's titled Sturgis Memories of an Average Mississippi White Boy, 1939 to 53. Walter's right here with me at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. Walter, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, Corey. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to be speaking with you. Walter, can you tell me all about your book and what readers can expect?
Well, it's the life adventures of a young boy up to age 14, his friends, his family, his peers, his teachers, the whole town folks. And it's in the small east central village of Sturgis, Mississippi. And it's basically a memoir and biography and autobiography all rolled into one.
Walter, what sorts of readers did you have in mind for this? Who was your target audience?
Well, I felt like the people that lived in these same times, maybe it would bring back some of their memories of their youth. And of course, we think that when we're gone and our children begin to have some questions, they'll answer some of these questions, my children, grandchildren, and maybe some friends.
When it comes to writing books, being published and all of that, Walter, is this your first time at it?
This is the first book that I have published, but I have done a lot of writing in my lifetime, more as a hobby than anything else. Lots of opinions, lots of political stuff, a lot of problem solving, and I've enjoyed writing. The first thing I remember writing was in the 10th grade at Texas City, Texas, and the teacher told me I ought to be a writer. Basically, I copied the first part of it, plagiarized the first part of it, and then I put in a surprise ending to it. I didn't tell her that. My answer to that is no, I'm going to be an engineer and an Air Force pilot.
So once you got started on this book, Walter, was it a long process for you to write it and then put through that publishing process?
It was certainly a long process. It took me almost 2 years. And the reason is with my cognitive and my lack of spelling ability and wanting to, have good sentence structure and good paragraphs and include all my thoughts, it took me almost 2 years. And it was a real chore. I'm not complaining. I'm asking God if he'd like to hear the rest of my life story. Maybe we can write another book together.
That was my next question. Do you think you have more books in you?
Yeah, I'd like to. I have a very unique life. Let me just start out. I have had, I think, about 60 addresses. I finally quit counting them. I've lived in about 30 cities, several of them several times, and in 6 states, several of them several times. And I've done everything from construction work as a kid to being a vice president of manufacturing.
So this is a long time coming. You put a lot of hard work into it. And finally, you got to hold that first copy. And it was a finished product. It was a real thing. So, Walter, what kind of a moment was that like for you?
Well, I read the manuscript several times, or one time, and then we had to go back and do the corrections for the publicist. It really affected me more when I reread it after it was published. I mean, it brought those memories out to a brighter color and things that I had. It put it all together, so to speak. And so I really enjoyed reading my own book.
Well, you said you've enjoyed writing all your life, and here you are now. You're officially a published author. Walter, what's the most rewarding aspect of that for you?
Well, I think the most rewarding thing is I'm really not the author of this book. The author are the people of Sturgis, Mississippi, and all my memories of them. I was really just the recorder. As a matter of fact, I had a book signing for the town and my classmates. Well, I call them my classmates. I left there when I finished 8th grade. I asked them to sign my book, too, and put any notes in that they can. So I really have to give the people in the book for most of the memories.
Walter, do you have anything in the way of advice that you might be able to throw out there for the authors who are listening who are just starting out?
You have to not be too worried about how good it is. We are who we are. We need to try to be ourselves. People expect no more out of us than who we are.
I think readers are really going to enjoy this one. It's titled Sturgis, Memories of an Average Mississippi White Boy, 1939 to 53. This is written by Walter Donald Foster, published by Christian Faith Publishing. So really you can find it anywhere like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Walter, thank you again for joining me here and telling me all about this. I had a really nice time talking with you.
Well, I thank you for, your kindness and your help. And I will tell you something else. God loves you, and I do too.
Right now, I'm really happy to be sitting down with author Elizabeth Gidos here at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. Elizabeth, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Congratulations. You have a new book out. It's titled 100 Seconds to Midnight. So, Elizabeth, can you tell me all about it?
It is a collection of poetry that I wrote over the last few years. It goes back and forth between political and when I was a young girl.
So what was your inspiration to collect that poetry and publish it, put it in book form?
I always had a love for being out there and getting my work done and getting my poetry and my writings out there. And I wanted to be able to allow other people to read what's going on in my mind.
So is this your first time being published?
No, actually, my first time being published was I Was Never Crazy, and that was a novel.
So when it comes to 100 Seconds to Midnight, Elizabeth, what sorts of readers do you think would enjoy this the most?
I think a lot of poets would be really interested in this. It is dark poetry, but it also has a flair for a little bit of the lightness to it. I'm just hoping that people will accept it for what it is.
So once you had this all down, your manuscript was finished, you handed that off to Newman Springs Publishing, started that whole publishing process, and there's a ton of stuff involved in there. Elizabeth, what did you find the most challenging part about that whole publishing process?
Oh, goodness, editing. Editing is a necessary evil, but it gets done.
And you had a lot of time, a lot of hard work into this, and finally that day came. Open up your mailbox, there it is, the finished product. It's a real thing. 100 Seconds to Midnight, you were holding it in your hands finally. Elizabeth, what kind of a moment was that like?
It was awesome. I was really proud of myself. I was just overjoyed. I was just really happy because something that I had written has come true. That is something that is really big.
So you've had this dream of having your work published, and now it is. Now you're officially a published author. You have some books out there. What's the most rewarding aspect of that for you?
Just having it out there, having a dream, and then going further than the dream and getting it out there so that the public can read it. And I think that's something that's so incredible.
So you have a novel, you have a book of poetry. What's next? Have you thought about writing more, maybe getting more published down the road?
I do. I have the next novel. It's coming out slowly, but it is a novel, and it will probably be published by 2025.
And when you're writing your novels, Elizabeth, are you the kind of writer that uses an outline, or are you the kind of writer that just starts with something and starts writing and see where it goes?
I usually have an outline, a mental outline, but I also have sort of like an idea and sort of like the plot and everything like that. So, it goes both ways. It comes together in the end. In the end, it's actually wonderful, and it comes together and it meets, and that's the best part of it.
So you write poetry, you write prose, and I have to think you have to be in a different mindset when you're writing each of those. Is your thought process different when you're doing that?
It is. With poetry, it's just more darkness, more kind of like personal. With prose, it's more detailed and a little bit of darkness, but also just really character expanding and everything like that.
So I talk with a lot of authors, and something I've noticed is if you like to write, oftentimes that goes hand in hand with reading. Elizabeth, are you a big reader?
I am a huge reader. I've got a room dedicated to books and only books.
Well, I think readers are going to love this. Again, the title is 100 Seconds to Midnight. It's written by Elizabeth Gidos and published by Newman Springs Publishing. So it's available at places like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and iTunes, and also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Elizabeth, it's been wonderful talking with you tonight. Thanks again for being on the show with me.
Thank you so much.
The new book, written by Reverend James Solomon, it's titled Demonic Manipulation in Dreams. It's a guide to understanding and overcoming spiritual deception while you sleep. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Reverend James Solomon is right here with me now. Reverend, thank you for joining me tonight. Welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
Can you tell me all about demonic manipulation in dreams? What are readers going to find here?
Let me just start by saying that a number of people do not understand that dreams are meaningful. Dreams are not just like some people feel it's nightmare, just forget about it. It doesn't mean anything. So I want my reader to understand that from the beginning, dream has been the cheapest communication between man and God. God has used dream. Some of us who are Christian, we already believe that Jesus' message was passed across to Mary, and also the message was passed across to Joseph. Joseph received the message in the dream, and God told Joseph that the baby in the womb of Mary is of the Holy Ghost. So it was from the dream. And several passages in the Bible, God has used dreams to pass across his messages to human beings. The cheapest means, you don't have to be a prayer warrior, you don't have to be fasting. You may not even be a born-again Christian. You may just be a normal man who is living his own life without any knowledge of Bible. And yet, you can have dreams. I can go back to tell you about Pharaoh. Pharaoh was not a Christian, not a born-again like we believe. But then God gave him a dream. Joseph was a young person. God gave him a dream. So I want people to understand, my reader to know that when we see dreams, we don't ignore. Dreams can be a message from God. But then in my book, I divided it into three. And I said there were some good dreams that God gives to us as warning, as instructions, as guidance. Also, where the manipulation comes from is when there were other forces that Satan and his kingdom also can manipulate our minds with bad dreams. And our mind as well can friction things out. Maybe because of what we think overnight, because of what has happened to me, and because I first worried before I slept. It is possible that because we have soul, we have spirit, and we have body, it's possible that some things are put together by your mind and then it becomes a dream. So I try to explain these three, that people will know there is a manipulation in dream. It does not mean that dreams are bad.
James, what sort of a reading audience do you have in mind for this?
Well, this particular book, I had in mind that it could go to anywhere. It's not only Christians, because I mentioned when I was talking to you now that dream is the cheapest means by which God communicates to us. Anybody dream, a Christian dream, a Muslim dream, an idol worshiper dream, people dream. Every human being have access to dream. And dream can be for warning, for instruction, for guidance, for direction. So, like I mentioned, Pharaoh dreamt, and he was looking for meaning. So it's not limited to Christians only. It's for everyone who is concerned about dreams. So I was able to break into three pieces to understand there's a dream that came from the enemy, which is the devil. The major dream comes from God as warning and instructor. So my market in my mind is that everyone who wants to know about the book, about dreams, should have a copy of this book.
James, is this something that took you a long time to write?
Well, it took a long time, not really long. It has been a message God placed in my heart. I'm a preacher, so I have preached this sermon in many places, and people were wondering, because a lot of people have no idea of what dream is all about. So it took me longer time because I have been preaching this sermon before. So I decided this sermon has blessed thousands of people all over the world. Why can't I put it together in a book so that everybody can read? That's why.
Well, this book definitely tackles some important things. Again, it's titled Demonic Manipulation in Dreams. It's written by Reverend James Solomon and published by Christian Faith Publishing. So you can find it everywhere, really, places like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, and also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. James, it's been really, really nice talking with you tonight. Thanks again for coming on the show with me.
Appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Rescued Love, Vignettes from Our Life with Rescue Dogs. That's the name of the book. It just came out. It's written by Kenneth Wright, and we're going to be talking all about this. Ken is right here with me now at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. Ken, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be on with you.
Absolutely, and I can't wait to find out about Rescued Love. Ken, can you tell me what readers are going to find here?
Well, they're going to find a couple of people who were clueless about dogs kind of stumble into adopting our first dog, and then a lot of struggles and mistakes and headaches as we got to know how to care for a dog and how to manage life with a new little dog in our house. But little by little, we began to figure out what we were doing. And we met this dog one day. We just looked out our window and saw her kind of dancing. It seemed like dancing to us in our neighbor's yard because a bunch of teenagers were having a party. And the music was pretty loud, and it looked like the dog was dancing, going back and forth to the music. A few days later, my wife actually ended up bringing the dog home because our neighbors already had two dogs, and they had actually found the dog kind of wandering on a street near our home. They ended up bringing it home with them, and they tried to locate the owner. They called the police looking to see if someone had found the dog. They had also put an ad in the newspaper, but nobody responded. And so they had decided to take the dog to the pound. My wife had little by little started to fall in love with that little ball of fur, and she decided she'd love to bring it home. And so I agreed with her that it would sound like a good idea, and we did bring it home. A couple years later, we also rescued a second dog. Both of them were Shetland sheepdogs, even though we had no idea what a Shetland sheepdog was when we first rescued this dog. And then the majority of the book is talking about just little, well, I call them vignettes, but little aspects or little bits and pieces of what life with dogs is like. Like, for example, I wrote a chapter about our second rescue dog, his relationship with our vacuum cleaner. They had a very troubled relationship, we'll say that. Then I wrote one chapter about giving baths to the dogs, what that was like.
Always an adventure there.
Yes, it was, yeah. I had not bathed a dog since I was a kid, because we had a dog when I was a kid, but I was not responsible much for taking care of it. But I had bathed him, but it had been a long time. And then also we got into the world of dog competitions, first rally obedience and then later agility. And I tell all about that. Then one chapter, we had taken a trip out to the East Coast where we had stopped at Philadelphia, and later we went on to Boston. And one of our dogs, the smaller one of the two, had injured herself a few weeks before we left for the trip because she had fallen down some of the steps in our home. And she had pretty much recovered, but my wife was worried about her, so she went on the internet and she ordered a dog stroller for her. And this caused quite a bit of commotion and stirs. We were pushing a dog stroller around in these tourist locations. In particular, there were a group of European ladies there. They're speaking some language. It sounded like it was from Eastern Europe somewhere. Maybe Polish, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with how that language sounds. But anyway, they got one look at that, and they totally forgot about all of the tourist attractions around them. And they were going bananas over that dog in the stroller. And then there is a chapter about, I thought probably no one had ever written anything about this before, but I wrote a chapter about cleaning up their butts after they're done pooping. I think that's probably original. Nobody else had ever done that.
I bet. So looking down the road, have you given thought to maybe doing it again? Do you think you'll be writing more?
I have thought about writing a sequel. The thought has crossed my mind. We had adopted some other dogs. One of the dogs we adopted entered our home after our first rescue dog had passed away. And so the story certainly continues of our life with dogs. And so I thought if there was some interest, I may indeed go ahead and work on that sequel. Yeah.
Oh, what a wonderful book. I think so many readers are going to love this. Again, it's titled Rescued Love, Vignettes from Our Life with Rescue Dogs. It's written by Kenneth Wright, published by Christian Faith Publishing, so you can find it really anywhere, like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iTunes, and also right down the street at your local bookshop. Ken, it's been really great chatting with you tonight. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciated talking to you and giving me the opportunity to talk about my book tonight.
I'm really happy to be joined again by author Lisa Wilson. Lisa, welcome back to the show. It's great to be speaking with you again.
Oh, you too. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And this time we're talking about your book, Truth, Discover Your Worth in Truth. So, Lisa, can you give me an idea for what readers are in store for here?
Sure. Truth is a devotional. It takes the biblical affirmations that God used in my first book, Worth. It takes them one at a time for 40 days. But it also challenges the reader to visualize their prayers, to stretch their praise vocabulary, and to get comfortable just being still before the Lord.
As far as the audience for this, would you say that these are for more younger Christians or more mature Christians?
Actually, both, because that's just the way the Bible goes. You can take it very simply, and that's what this does, is it explains what these affirmations mean. And it gives an application from a story from myself that how I was able to see this in actual life, not just as something that I read in a book, but how I applied that practically to my daily walk. The deeper we are as Christians, the longer we've been saved, the deeper we can go. So it's for all audiences.
This is a 40-day devotional. Does that parallel the 40 days we read about in the Bible, Jesus' 40 days and such?
You know, the 40 days is brought up so many times that I actually wrote about it on the 40th day.
Oh, wow.
It is. It's a time of testing. And it's a part of growing is what it really is. And, you know, there's so many. Some are so obvious, like Noah's Ark. And even like you mentioned, Jesus being tested. But some people don't know. And it's just there's got to be at least 20 examples in the Word where God used 40 days.
So 40 different devotionals. I imagine this might take a little bit longer than your normal book would go, being that it has 40 separate parts in it. Was that the case?
You just take one every day for 40 days. I actually did this one. This book came out in September. It's my favorite of the three. When I got my copies, they were already spoken for because the people who, my sample copies, the people who already had Worth wanted them. And so I was handing them out and they were gone. And so I ordered more. As soon as I got more, I sat down and started and went through it. And I really enjoyed it. And not because I did anything. It's what the Holy Spirit did through me. I just love what God did with this book.
So would you say the writing and publishing process, that was a pretty smooth one, or did you hit some speed bumps along the way?
Oh, this one was the worst of the three. We ran into more problems. It was just completely under attack, and it still is. I mean, even to this moment, they're doing advertisement, and they're taking quotes from the other books. And so it's just really been under attack, which, you know, as a Christian and been saved a long time, I know that that's because the enemy just hates this book. I don't know if it's because I titled it Truth, because, I mean, even that, they kept trying to change, not by anybody doing it on purpose, but they were trying to call this book My Truth instead of, you know, The Truth. It's been the one that's caused the most.
So while you were writing this, you said you took one every day, Lisa. Were you writing pretty much the same time every day? Are you like an early morning writer or late night writer? Or were you just writing kind of whenever you felt that inspiration?
For this book, I set myself like a schedule. And so there was a certain time of the day that I made an appointment with myself, and I kept it. And I would go as long as I possibly could until something else happened that made me stop. And wherever I stopped, that's where I stopped. So if I didn't finish what I had set out to, that was okay. There were other days that I did more than I wanted to, so it ended up right in the right place.
Well, I'm looking at this book, at Truth, and the cover's beautiful, and the cover for Worth was beautiful as well. So is that something that you put a lot of thought into?
I took that picture.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
That's my property. We bought that property, and I want to say it was only like a month or something that we moved here. That's where I wrote the books, was on this property.
Well, I know this book is going to bless so many readers. Again, it's called Truth, Discover Your Worth in Truth. It's written by Lisa Wilson and published by Covenant Books. So find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iTunes, and right down the street at your local bookshop. Lisa, it's been really wonderful speaking with you again. Thanks again for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Sitting down with me right now here at the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, I'm really happy to be talking with author DeAnn Lee. DeAnn, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you being here with me tonight.
Welcome to you, too. It's nice to be here.
DeAnn, I have to congratulate you on having a new book out titled Hero's Treasure, True Stories of Deep Courage. I love the themes here, DeAnn. Can you tell me all about this?
Wow. Well, it is a book about action and adventure. I was a underwater recovery diver for the Sheriff's Department in Washoe County, Nevada for 23 years. And so I went out and found people or things underwater. If someone drowned, I would go out and look for them, find them. In the book, I try to help people see from the person's point of view the things that might have gone wrong and the things that could go right in your life or the life of the reader. It's an adventure.
DeAnn, what kinds of readers did you have in mind?
Right now, I'm getting reviews back from all sorts of different people. My biggest audience I was thinking would be best for is like high school age students. But I'm getting reviews back from people of all ages going, it is amazing. But I think more, it should be the person that's an outdoorsman or likes to read about things going on outdoors. Like water specifically was my specialty. But the Hasty team was a lot more than water. It was what we call technical rescue. So we'd go out and find people where the search and rescue would, and then the Hasty team would go out and perform the technical rescue, which is high-angle rope systems, helicopter deployed, swift water, underwater. Anything that took a special skill that had to be gone through was our niche. We would go out and find them and use these special skills to come up with the person. Either alive or recovery, yeah.
This is really fascinating. DeAnn, how did you decide to start the book?
Well, I was on the team for 23 years, and I would tell people some of the different adventures that we went on and ways that we found people. And everyone said, man, you should write a book about this. This is absolutely amazing. I just started getting up in the morning and spending a little time on the computer, and before I knew it, the book was written. Actually, I had two written, and the second one hasn't been published yet, but it's written together.
Fantastic. Is this the first time you've done this kind of thing, or do you have writing in your background?
No writing. In fact, I grew up like pretty dyslexic. I couldn't read or write very good at all, but I tell really good stories. And I used the voice to text, and the computer would type it out for me, and then I would have the computer read it back, and I'd make adjustments and changes. And for someone who doesn't read or write, it turned out really good. The reviews coming in now are all 5-star. And the people are just saying that it's something that everyone should read, especially young people like high school age or people that are adventurers or first responders.
So once you had your manuscript down and you sent it out to your publisher, to Newman Springs, what did you find the most challenging part about that whole publishing end of things?
One of the big parts was finding an editor. And I finally found a person that was they had me, redo the book several ways, had me split the book into 2 books. And Hero's Treasure is the first one done. The second book is ready to go. But after several times of redoing it, this person I was talking to as an editor said, I'm really not an editor. I'm a literary agent. But I will edit this book because it is a fantastic book. And so he edited it for me. And really, I think one of the most difficult is finding someone that could edit the book. Other than that, things went pretty smoothly.
Well, DeAnn, we have a lot of people listening right now who are authors just starting out. So do you have maybe something in the way of advice that you could throw out there for them?
In the writing process, the thing that helped me the most was meditation. I spent at least a minimum of 10 minutes before I started to write anything in the morning, just focusing on breathing and trying not to think about anything and let thoughts just come into my head and then observe the thoughts and try to focus on breathing again. It's mindfulness meditation. I'd say without that, the book wouldn't have been near what it is. So if you're writing, you get blocked, sit down and just try to focus on breathing, and really good things will start coming to you.
That's great advice. Well, great messages in this book. It's full of courage, full of sacrifice. I think readers are going to love this. Again, the title is Hero's Treasure, True Stories of Deep Courage. It's written by DeAnn Lee, published by Newman Springs Publishing. It's available really everywhere, places like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or iTunes, and also traditional brick-and-mortar stores. But DeAnn, thank you again for coming on the show and telling me all about this. It's been really nice talking with you.
Nice talking to you, too.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable. where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. We hope to see you back here every Friday night at 8 p.m. or listen anytime via podcast at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, to name just a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.